the inventor of the N machine, Bruce DePalma.
Yes, it's a pleasure to be back again.
We're on television too again.
Again, yes.
Something's happening TV. You know, SCTV, this is SHTV.
Well, I guess it's a step someplace.
Let me see. We have to pay some respect and attention to a number of people who have joined the show as avid listeners since you were here last. So if we could have a short review of who is Bruce DePalma, then, and why is he here?
Yes, he was Bruce DePalma.
Then we can take off, because I know you're very, very excited over a whole lot of information you got in Europe in the last several weeks.
That's right, yes.
But there are a lot of people joined us because it's double publicity thing. So you are the inventor of the N machine.
Right, the N machine. N is a number like the nth degree, and this very simple machine has so many possibilities to it that when I got the idea for it, I thought, well, how could I possibly describe it? And the letter N, capital N, seemed appropriate because it means the nth degree or n dimensions or any number which is large. So that's how it got named. And what it's the result of is that I am a basic physical scientist, and that means I'm interested in kinds of simple little problems, like how much things weigh and how fast they travel and stuff like that. And I did a number of experiments a long time ago, 20 years ago. Most of the professors in science recoil at the idea that there might be anything new, because so many thoughts have been thought since the beginning of scientific experimentation. It's hardly likely that anything new will be discovered. And
that's why they wanted to close the patent office about 90 years ago.
That's right. They thought they had all the basic problems solved, but the basic...
They always think that.
I know, but you see, yes, I agree with you. It's hard. What can I say? But the real basic problem is man itself, because man has certain implicit assumptions he makes about things, and those are the real basic problems. And they're the things that prevent us from doing certain little simple things, like thinking that rotation might be different from non-rotation. But anyway, to make a long story short, I worked on this material for studying rotation for about 10 years, and I did develop some very interesting experiments, but I couldn't get the physics community interested in them at all, and especially because my experiments invalidate the general theory of relativity and open the door to things like free energy. And this is very, very basic stuff, and most people just don't want to deal with it. So then, being that I always had been interested in electricity, I tried to think up some kind of electrical phenomena that would represent all the new things that I had learned about rotating objects. And so then I decided, or I got the inspiration, or somehow it was channeled to me that a magnetized gyroscope or a magnetized flywheel might have some interesting properties. And so the very first experiments I did on the magnetized flywheel, which is a form of electrical generator, have developed into what's known as a free energy machine, which produces more energy than it takes to turn it. And that's opened up a whole new technology. And I guess what we're leading up to is the fact that all the years I've been pursuing this work and trying to circulate my results through the underground journals have had an impact around the world. And I went to Germany, having been invited to an international congress on relativity and gravitation, which was on the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of last month of April, and to give a paper not only on the N machine, but all the physics that led up to it. And this was a really fantastic experience for me and an opportunity, because Well, I've gotten a total snub from all the physics journals and the professors and people who were asked to comment on my work in this country. I walked into a situation in Germany where not only they received me with open arms because of my physics, but there were already 3 groups of people at this conference that had made my machine and had replicated my results. That is to say, they got like 3 to 1, 3 times more out than in, and 2.5 more than out than in. But anything over 100% is pretty fantastic. So I went into a situation which was very receptive, and this was a Congress that had people from Russia, America, all the countries of Europe, and these were the kinds of professors that walked around in black suits and black ties and white, very professorial types. And to have this going on in the Kepler room, in the Deutsches Museum in the center of Munich, nothing could be more venerable or dripping with the hallowed traditions of physics. So to be in the room with all these professors and to be, for the first time in my life, received, and then at the end of it, I felt I was being regarded with a certain mixture of respect and maybe touched with awe, because really the results I've presented there does do the last blow to the general theory of relativity, and will open the door to a whole new physics, which depends upon the newly discovered, I would say in the last 20 years, properties of rotation, which has never been recognized as having any properties different from non-rotation. So that's a kind of I don't know whether you wanted a preamble as long as that.
That's real good. I want to say, in the interest of fairness at this time, that in the United States, although it sounds like the old familiar story, you will be snubbed now, but there'll be a movie about you in 50 or 100 years, that regular scientists, many regular scientists in the United States consider Bruce DePalma and people as Joseph Newman and Lloyd Zerbe as either crackpots, liars, a con man, and I have been accused of programming bordering on criminality by having Bruce DePalma here, not only once, but repetitively. and so you are to be warned about that. But I'm really glad to hear that. It reminds me of Freud speaking to being snubbed, and then speaking to some organization of Jewish intellectuals, and being received for the first time as somebody, harbinger of the future. It was his own people, and then in decades, then being received in the highest places, when he was beneath contempt, as was almost everybody. That's really come up with new ideas.
Well, I'd say that you could go back to the Bible and read a few chapters in there about that. Sure, the establishment tries to make you feel like dirt, and I knew all the big names. I came from the big places. I've had a real, I don't know whether this word is allowed on KPFK, a real screwing from my fellow scientists in this country. But nevertheless, the worm turns, and I come back from Germany having been given a tremendous shot of energy by this experience. And what I think might be good at this time is to play a portion of the lecture that I gave there, and so that you can hear what the atmosphere was like and what it was to be in front of these people.
Is this at Kepler?
This is in Kepler Hall there. And
Kepler Hall where?
At the Deutsches Museum, which is this famous old museum of technology in the center of Munich. I couldn't have asked for a more hallowed place for physics. This is, and the people there were the most profound thinkers that I had ever run into in the theories of gravity and relativity. And the kinds of discussions that took place were really magnificent. A lot of the people who think about these subjects, very basic subjects, are brought together at these conferences, and they meet each other and they cross-fertilize. And this was a wonderful experience, because people in physics are really trying to find a new theory, some new structure, some new idea to open up the world that we've been living in since all the theories have been put together in the early part of this century. So there's a lot of new stuff happening. And basically, my contribution to the whole situation has been that the end machine, because it consistently produces more electrical energy than it consumes and is duplicable, has opened the door to a whole range of energy technologies of various kinds, using different electrical effects and hydraulic experiments and electrical heating effects, which would have never been looked at if it had been thought that 100% was the limit. It's like we've gone past the speed of sound or the speed of light, and we're into a whole new world. So let's listen to this thing that goes on here for about a half hour, and you get some idea of what I said over there, and then we can talk about some of the implications of what this means, and I can talk about the groups that I met over there and the things they were to show. I actually saw the end machines that had been built over there, and in fact, one company is about to start production on the first 100, but I'll speak about that later. Why don't we go into this?
Okay, here's Bruce DePalma at
the Kepler Hall in the Deutsches Museum on the 23rd of April.
1988.
1988.
Great.
And so I don't have the the final end of it.
You know, it's hard to be you can't be your own engineer when you're an artist. You know, when you're doing a right hemisphere.
I mean, this was just too much. It was too exciting, and what happened was that I went on and
KPFK Los Angeles.
At the point where the tape ran out, I went on and I showed the end machine made by the Sunburst community, the first one, and then I showed...
Which is a really extraordinarily beautiful piece of equipment.
Yeah, that's a very, very classical... Yeah. It's a nice piece. And then I showed the work of Adam Trombley, and then I showed the work of Tiwari, Paramahamsa Tiwari in India. And at that point, I ended, because the purpose of this was not to extol the end machine, but it was to simply talk about the scientific basis which led to that. And so for the basic physical scientist, in order for him to understand free energy, he's got to see a simple experiment which unequivocally demonstrates the effect. And of course that experiment was the dropping of the rotating object, which dropped faster. And through the collision experiments, I could see that it collided and transferred more momentum than a non-rotating object could. So this, even so, having these facts right in front of my eyes, it took me, I would say, on the order of 6 months before I could really begin to accept that this might be true. And I can see how difficult it is for most people to accept this idea, but maybe it's only a transient, you know. Maybe you get over it as you get used to it more.
I think, for the most part, one can't really imagine what this means. Now, this is so you performed an experiment which shows that some physical law, very important physical laws, are not valid. And so, what does that mean for the world?
What this means is a simple way to get into this. Of course, we want something practical from this. We want something we can do something about our energy situation with. Now, the end machine generator that I constructed, and it was tested by Dr. Kinchlow of Stanford, produced almost 4 to 1 out over in. Now, the machines in Germany, which I saw, the best one was doing about 3.2 to 1, and I got the original data from those machines and pictures and photographs and stuff of that stuff in front of me here. But what I'm basically trying to say is that a normal induction generator, the kind that's used in every car or powerhouse or everything, has a possibility of putting out 100% efficiency. That's its theoretical possibility, and that possibility comes from the principle of induction, which means moving a wire near a magnet. And we know that when you move a wire near a magnet, you get a voltage which appears in the wire, and then if you use that voltage in some kind of circuit, the current which flows through the wire, which is moving past the magnet, generates its own magnetic field which drags against the magnet, and therefore you have to put energy into the generator when you turn the lights on or when you put a load on it because of this drag. Now, an end machine, if you perform the same test on it, if you put the load on and see how much power you have to put in to make up for the application of a certain amount of loading, you'll find that, say, in a given machine, you'll get only 1/3 of the increase in the drive power that you would get with a normal machine, which turned around means the end machine has a possibility of doing 3 to 1. Now,
that's 300%.
300%, but this
a nuclear power plant is 3%, right?
Yes, so much lower. You see, all of these. See, you have two different principles in operation. One capable of unity, or 100%, the other of 300. Now, these are two mechanical apparatuses. They're two machines, and so in order that you get the full potential of the 100% or the 300%, you have to make the mechanical losses in the machine small with respect to the electrical output. Now, you know, you have bearings in these machines on the shaft, and you have the wind loss of the rotors going around, and there are other drags due to the flow of currents, which we call hysteresis, and other less definable sorts of losses. But these losses are the sort of a constant drag that has to be overcome by the power output of the machine. So for normal types of generators, you have to get up to 25 or 30 horsepower before you get above, say, 90% efficiency. The generators which they use in atomic power plants, which can produce 1,000 megawatts, these machines operate at, say, 99.5% efficiency because the electrical power output is so much greater than the mechanical losses in the system. In general, the bigger you build a machine, the more the electrical output is in relation to the mechanical losses. What that means is that in terms of an end machine, you have to build a big enough end machine so that the mechanical losses don't completely use up all the advantage you get from the 3 to 1 intrinsic property of the machine. Now, what happens is that as the output of the end machine increases, the losses also increase. And there is a point when you get above a certain amount of power output or speed where the total electrical output exceeds the total mechanical losses, and so you can get an overall efficiency of something like 105 or 110%, even though the intrinsic machine may be doing 3 to 1. But as soon as you get over 100%, including all the losses, then you have the possibility of making the self-running engine. And this is something which the people in Europe are going after, the people in India are going after, and of course DePalma is also going after this. But the difference between DePalma and the other workers in the field is that DePalma actually performed the $500,000 experiment where he had to construct a machine capable of 100,000 watts and then test it to see whether or not, through its range of operation, the electrical output could be made to exceed all the mechanical losses. And we did find that this crossover point takes place around slightly under 6,000 RPM, or maybe an output power of about 30 kilowatts. So what this means is that when you can recirculate 30 kilowatts of power from the output back to the input through some kind of drive motor, you've reached a point where the machine will self-sustain. Now, the European machines, the maximum power outputs are on the order of 6 kilowatts at this point. So even with the machines that they've constructed, they couldn't make them run themselves. but that's not the principal activity right now. And I could talk more about what the Germans are doing. Is that what you'd like me to discuss at this moment?
Well,
experiment, some specific interpretation that they can digest bit by bit, piece by piece. So it's a question of not only approaching it from a theoretical level, but also from an experimental practical level too, like the idea I had of the defect of forces. And when I was at this conference, for 3 days these professors hassled over interpretations of relativity. And when I finally had my say, I said, everybody's been arguing over the interpretations, but no one has ever argued over any of the experiments. See, so what we see is that it's our interpretations we argue over, and that different interpretations can lead to different results, some of which may be useful. For instance, the idea of the interpretation of perfection as applied to forces, such that we can begin to get some idea of inertia or inertial mass and how that's produced. And this may not be the complete description, but it's a facet which helps us to at least get some thought idea about understanding something we never understood before. Yeah, you see, the real mistake in theoretical physics is to think that one theory can describe everything. And people, there's a sort of a mathematical artistry that goes on when one constructs a principle, takes a principle like symmetry and develops it into supersymmetry like John Wheeler, and then you make a whole marvelous mathematical system where everything is symmetrical, which is very beautiful. But this may not correspond to reality, you see. And the thing is, a lot of people spend more time in constructing these castles in the air than they spend in doing these difficult mechanical experiments. And then the structure gets to the point where the people who've done the castles in the air are in control, and they prevent the experiments from being done. Or if they're done, they prevent them from being published and accepted. And this is a very bad state, because this is where we are in science. And I might see, these are all the things I wanted to talk about tonight, but you see, if you have a man, we talked about science and what scientists do in Germany. They called me back on Sunday for a second session, and there were so many questions that people wanted to ask me after the lecture that they held a second 3-hour session, and I had 2 professors in German who PhDs and physicists who translated back from English to German, and what was probably the most beautiful experience in my life, to have an afternoon of dialogue on new concepts in physics. This was just a really magnificent, I can't tell you what an experience that was. And people were very, very concerned. And the concern there was expressed in the fact that the physicists that I met were also concerned with the planet. They had sensitivities to natural forces. They weren't completely tied up in some rigid doctrinaire opinion. They fought like tooth and nails to defend themselves or attack. And the German audience was a different audience. It was one where if they didn't like what you said, they'd attack. They wouldn't sit there and go to sleep and say, well, this is what's going on. But anyway, during these discussions, we tried to examine what should a physicist do and what should a scientist do. And the thing is, a scientist is a member of our species who should give his brains and his intelligence to the rest of mankind to help elevate their condition. And then most of the people, in fact all of them, agreed with this. But if you have people who have been paid to construct a better poison gas, to construct a better germ bomb, to construct a better radiation weapon, or figure out the orbits to blow up all the cities in Russia in one blast, these people, because they are doing such an anti-nature, anti-life activity, lose the power of constructive thought. And it puts a total limitation on any kind of change or any kind of new ideas coming into physics. And so I just feel that as a basic physical scientist, that scientists as a whole should take some kind of oath, like the doctors take, like a Hippocratic oath, in which they will not participate in any life-threatening or life-destructive activities. And if they do, they get disbarred or whatever, disboarded or whatever they do to people like that. But it's this ability of freedom, of openness, which constitutes the scientist. And as soon as the scientist is turned against his very nature by being bought and being allowed to, there's been some talk, for instance, that the AIDS virus was produced in some warfare laboratory and got out. Now the Army wants to put another one of these laboratories in Nevada. They want a second facility.
Utah.
Is it Utah, like Fort Detrick? Now I ask you, are these the activities of sane men? I don't think so. And it's this attitude which has stopped theoretical science in America. And it's the great tragedy that a country that has so much going for it industrially is so hobbled in the brain department by a closed-minded attitude that's based solely on the ends justifying the means, opportunism, let's just get it done no matter what. And I just think that this attitude of amorality is wrong. Right now they're planning to put more nuclear reactors in orbit to power Star Wars, for instance. There's already 22 Russian ones up there, and I think 30 American plutonium reactors circling overhead. There's more plutonium in one of those reactors than it's required to kill everybody on the planet.
One's scheduled to come down.
That's right. One's going to come down soon. And the only reason it doesn't kill everybody on the planet is because when they burn up, the dust is finely divided and falls at a very slow rate. Now, I'm trying to wake this country up. We will not overcome our difficulties with this sort of attitude. Every month, for instance, $14.4 billion goes out of this country on the average in our foreign exchange debt. Add on top of that the $2 or $3 billion that's leaving for South America in the drug money that isn't counted in that kind of thing. This is like a hole in the bottom of the bucket. We cannot let this go on, you see. And we have a very strange situation in this country where everybody says the Germans and the Japanese are the ones that we ought to bang on because their foreign exchange, they're accumulating too much. But does anybody talk about the Arabs that have been sucking us dry for so many years, since 72 or 73, over this oil? And half of that $14.4 billion is oil money. Now, nobody can tell me that we wouldn't improve our situation in this country if we couldn't overcome this oil problem. Now, is it that our whole government is being bought by the Arabs? Do they control so much money that we can't even break loose and develop an independent source of energy for our own country? I mean, if this is what's happened, then we should wake up. We should wake up. And that's about it on that subject.
Thank you very much.
Hello?
Hi. I was just wondering what Bruce has to say about Joseph Newman, his machine.
Joseph Newman is a very dedicated person who struggled very hard to bring his machine to the attention of the public and get it patented. There are those who say that his machine has anomalous properties and can be the basis of a machine which produces more energy than it consumes. Now, the Newman machine has a rotating output, and it also has a big coil which is interrupted every time the rotor goes around. And then the discharges of energy in this coil have been measured, and they seem to be stronger than the amount of energy which is needed to drive the machine. And Joe Newman has been trying to harness this high-frequency energy for quite a while, and I don't know whether he's had too much success at it. It's measured that it's there, but whether or not it can be harnessed is, open to question. But this is a question of technology, but I just would like to point out one interesting facet of the story of Joe Newman. You know that he's had a battle with the patent department and the judges and the lawyers and so forth, and spent $400,000 and so forth. Now, if you look at the whole situation, why wasn't Joe Newman given a patent? After all, if the patent had been awarded, he would have gotten a patent number, then he could have made his machines, and if anybody was infringing, he could have sued them. And the whole thing would have died very quietly, or it would have gone on. Who knows? But the thing is, the energy establishment is so frightened that there is even the thought of the possibility of creating energy from space that they threw the book at him. And then you wonder why I've had such a warm reception here in America, you see. And it's this cartel of energy which has really got our country strangulated. And this is what we have to break loose from. And this is what we never hear anything about, you see. And it also runs into things like this. For instance, look at Mexico. They owe us a lot of money. Now, that money is supposed to be paid out of oil revenues. Suppose, for instance, a new energy source were discovered and the Mexicans got onto it. Well, they might not pump as much oil, you see, and then we would never get our money paid back. And it's these kinds of instabilities that frighten people when they talk about free energy. Unfortunately for these so-called planners, the Germans are going to start mass production, and if they haven't started now. And so are the Indians. And so it's too late. It's too late. And so this country must adopt this technology. It's no longer a question of whether we decide what we're going to do. We have to. So I just hope someone hears me out there and helps me make that self-running machine. This is something we really need to do. Now, I know I've sort of digressed because you asked me about Joe Newman, but have I answered your question?
Yeah, I guess. Well, so you don't know about the machine itself. You don't know if it works or.
Oh, it does work. The Joe Newman machine?
Yeah.
Oh, of course it works. But whether it produces more energy out than in is yet to be shown.
Yeah.
See.
Okay. Well, thanks. I have one other quick question. You mentioned something about you on television within the next week.
Well, we have a guy who's videotaping this conversation, and I guess he thinks it's important enough to set up all his equipment and take this down. But if you're interested in a videotape of this, that might be available at some time, although it's not something we're doing anything but to document it right now.
Okay, great.
All right?
Thanks.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, I have two questions, and I was could help me out with that. Very interesting program, and I was wondering if you could tell me what the relation is between why an object falls faster when it's rotating and his idea of perfection.
Well, it's the idea of perfection is that with everything that might exist, there would also be an imperfect part of it as well as the perfect part. And
okay, that's an idea.
That's the idea. And then you say, well, you have a force, like the forces you get in a flywheel when you spin it. And you know that if you spin it fast enough, the flywheel will blow up, because these forces neutralize the forces which are holding it together. Now, if we look at the appearance of these forces through the paradigm of perfection, we would say then, well, it's not a perfect force that appears. There would be some imperfection to this force. And what would be the nature of the imperfection? It would be an inertial property. And that was my logical thought. Now,
does that mean that inertia is not perfect in some sense?
No, it means that inertia is the property of all physical objects. Okay, it's the property of all physical objects because they're not perfect. If they were perfect, in other words, if everything were perfect, it would go on forever. It would not, nothing would ever change. It would be completed and finished. You understand? The idea of perfect... No, you don't understand it.
I'm not sure that just because something goes on forever that it's perfect.
No. Depends on what you mean go on forever. A process can go on forever, but a thing like, take the idea of a radio station. In your brain, the idea of a radio station is perfect. And the idea of the radio station could exist as an idea forever, you see. But when you bring the radio station into existence with the cables and the connectors and all the wires and everything else like that, it's not the perfect radio station you imagined, it's a real radio station. Now,
some kind of mathematical description of your idea of perfection as a paradigm?
Yes, you can make a mathematical description of it in the following way. Think about the computation of pi. Pi is the ratio of the diameter to the circumference of a circle. Now, we know that through our mathematical computations that to compute this number exactly would be a process that would take us an infinite time, right?
I couldn't swear to that.
Well, the thing is, if you look at all the computations of pi, it depends on the power of the computer, and the computer just keeps grinding out digits. What I'm trying to say is that when you look at the circumference and the diameter of a circle, it's intuitively obvious, at least to me, that there is an exact number which pi is. That there must be an exact number. But when we try to find out what that exact number is, we run into a computation which could go on forever. So what I'm saying is that the idea of perfection can be examined in the light of something that we know has a certain exact value, but yet in order to try to get that exact value, we have to run into a computation of unlimited length.
Thank you. Can I ask my second question?
Does that make sense to you?
No, frankly.
Right. Okay, what's your second question?
The second one is that you say that this German group is going to come out in the near future with a prototype of a mass-producible machine. They're going to produce maybe 100 machines.
They're not a prototype. They're actually making 100 machines now.
And they're like 3-to-1 ratio?
Yeah, around 3-to-1. I have the figures in front of me. Highest about 3.2. Well, depends on how you put the parameters.
That's really, exciting in the sense that, I mean, if you can hook one of those machines up to the other one, right? I mean, exponentially, we're talking, enough energy to, I would assume it's, 3,
Yes, you can cascade them and you can multiply the factor. I get the picture.
That's amazing.
Yes, it is.
Really amazing. You amaze me.
All right. Is there anything else I can do?
Sorry?
Can I do anything else?
I'd like to get in contact with you sometime.
Write me a note or give me a call up in Santa Barbara.
Good luck.
All right, thank you.
Hello, you're on KPFK with Bruce DePalma.
Hello, Roy. Hello, Bruce. How are you?
Better and better.
Well, we're cruising along tonight.
I'm someone who really doesn't have any understanding of physics, and therefore what I'm interested in is, can the end machine be used to power a spacecraft, or is it dependent on Earth's gravity somehow?
Oh, exactly right. It can power a spacecraft, and it's not dependent on the Earth's gravity. And that's exactly what the combination of free energy and anti-gravity will result in. It is the spaceship, and that's exactly what we want to do with it.
Well, thank God the military is too stupid to understand that and apply it to Star Wars.
Well, this is the whole crazy thing about it.
If they were using it, we wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, are there any ways that you could control that conceivably through patents? I don't even know your patent situation.
Well,
control to keep it out of the military's hands?
No. That's kind of naive. Although I'm not trying to put you down or anything, but the idea of patenting a thing as simple as a rotating magnet it's kind of fanciful, because even if it could be patented, everybody's going to take it and copy it. For instance, when Tesla invented the three-phase electric motor, he never made a dime from all the motors that were made by all the companies in this country. And when Edison made the light bulb, although that was patented, he never made any money from light bulbs except the ones that he made. So a patent is a fine thing under certain circumstances. But in our country, there's an immediate prohibition in the energy department or the patent department that no device can be patented whose output is greater than the input, because this violates the laws of physics, quote unquote. And So that's number one. And number two, it really doesn't protect you very much. So it's not really worthwhile until our patent system becomes worldwide, and until they get rid of the prohibition against machines that produce more energy than they consume.
I see. There's something else I'd like to share with you.
Go on.
It's not exactly scientific, but it's just a fact. 8 years ago tonight, a man named Ian Curtis hanged himself. He was a 23-year-old singer for a band called Joy Division. And he hanged himself because the band was going to be signed to $1 million contract in New York the next week by Warner Brothers, and he just couldn't handle that. If you ever get your hands on a Joy Division record, I'm turning you on to this because you're heroes of mine. It's amazing and empowering music. Go for it.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Oh, well. Good night.
Good night.
I would listen too carefully to music written by somebody who committed suicide, frankly. Hello?
Yes, I would like to give a comparison and see what he thinks about this. Comparing the principle of the end machine with the principle of meditation and consciousness, where one inputs into a void, like inside, and receives more consciousness out of that than what they put into it. If that would be any kind of comparison to what he's talking about as energy.
Boy, that's a very interesting thought. Never thought about it that way.
Because in a moment of stillness, a person can get hours of thinking.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right. Yes. I think this is a philosophical idea, basically.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. But I do think you're right that the mind is, in a sense, a free energy machine, and when you penetrate into the depths of its consciousness, you're rewarded with a thought that will keep you going maybe for the rest of your life. So, yes. So it's an interesting philosophical parallel, although it would be hard to express that in physical terms.
Well, it's just the idea that if things are similar in different elements, that give it some credence.
That's right. You can say that on higher levels and lower levels there's a correspondence.
It's a fractal relationship.
Well, they say it's so as above is as below.
As above, so below. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Power without pollution.
No nuclear pollution, no acid rain.
No acid rain.
We won't have to dig up all the oil.
No, not at all.
We won't have to put oil wells in Santa Monica Bay, and we'll be able to pull our ships back from the Persian Gulf because we won't need that oil.
Well, that's one way of looking at it. The other side of looking at it is to say that a new principle of energy release, which is made of non-technical materials, as the end machine is, it's just ordinary iron and copper. This will empower the ordinary man, or the peasant, or the farmer, and will allow self-sustaining agricultural communities. And so, it's the end machine may prevent a lot of oil wells and things from happening and stuff like that, but its major effect on our society will be to decentralize our whole world, and we will be released from the energy grid of the electric power companies and also the gasoline stations. Now, this isn't...
They're not too happy about that.
Well, now, you see, this is the interesting thing about my trip to Europe. Now, I went there, and I got actual data from machines that are being built there. I have pictures of what was happening. I'm not in a situation where I'm trying to sell anybody anything. And several serious discussions are taking place over there between me and these engineers, and we're discussing this whole problem. Now, the big thing that I noticed when I went to Germany, well, the first thing I noticed was the American money wasn't worth anything. The last time I had been there, I was 20 years ago, and there then the mark was 4.2 marks to the dollar. And when I went back this time, I went and I saw a situation where I got 1.5 or 1.6 marks to the dollar. And in general, it cost me more money to live in Germany at the hotel that the conferences were happening at than it would if I had lived at the Biltmore in Santa Barbara. So I found that the American dollar wasn't worth anything. The other thing I found was that the professors and doctors and students I spoke to were very academically inclined. They were really interested in fundamental problems. They were not totally taken up with military consequences, and they weren't operating in an atmosphere of secrecy. So between the three groups I did meet, we exchanged an enormous amount of information, and what I could see is that the end machine is out of control. It's not anywhere subject to any kind of restraint, because these three groups are made different designs and different combinations of things, and they're trying to actually perfect a unit for mass production. The group that's the most ahead is going to start producing 100 of these machines, I think around in the 6 to 10 kilowatt range. What they're going to use them, these are 3-to-1 machines, and what the company that, I have the data in front of me, the company that's the furthest ahead is a company that makes catalysts for chemical processes, and they use a lot of hydrogen. And the hydrogen they buy is of such and such an expense, but if they electrolyze their own, they can save 2/3 of the cost, and that was what the plan is. They want to use these machines for electrolysis, for hydrogen. They want to use them for aluminum refining and other situations where the low voltage and the high current is something desirable. And the idea is at first not to make the self-running machine, but simply to improve on the processes that they presently have, and they can remove a normal generator and put one of these things in and get more power out than they had before. And they're willing to go for that. Then on top of that, they do want to make a self-running machine too, but it's, I think, a question of the scale of things. Europeans don't think on the same scale that Americans do. The machine that I made is way beyond, in the sense that, not in terms of the precision of the mechanical construction, because their lathe work is very, very precise, but we use neodymium iron magnets, which they haven't reached yet. They're still using electromagnets. We use liquid metal contacts, and the use of liquid metal is another one of those things which takes a certain degree of skill, and they haven't quite been ready to attack that yet.
It is a mercurial question.
Well, it's another one of those things. I mean, we've worked on it, and you just have to jump in, and so so we use mercury, and we use much stronger magnetic fields, and we have constructed a much larger machine, say 100 kilowatts, with respect to say 4 to 6. So our machine is
That's the American way.
Well, right, it's the American way, but
it's the Harley Davidson of free energy machine.
I don't know, but it's nearly killed all of us to make it, for sure.
Well, would you like to take some phone calls?
Sure.
You might have excited some interest with this.
I just, yes, I think so. That would be wonderful. I just want to say a couple of things about, yes, I will take some phone calls. I just wanted to say a couple of things about research in general, that if you uncover a principle in science which has the possibility of providing something useful, i.e. you discover that there is a generator principle which on the surface, that is, incrementally gives you, say, 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 2-to-1, then you have to say to yourself, well, is this worth investigating, and is it possible to do something useful with this? And this type of research is a sort of a thing where you have to follow out all the possibilities, and you have to do the appropriate experiments, and you build it up step by step. It isn't as if you suddenly make a self-running engine. This is something that people have dreamed about since I don't know, since Merlin the Magician or something like that. This is a really amazing manifestation of our knowledge of science, and it takes every bit that we can put into it to make it. So you just don't build this up and say, here it is, there's the self-running machine. It's a real research project based on real science and a tremendous amount of technical work, which is just where we are right now in our development. We want to complete the self-running machine. And we'd like to do it in America. Maybe it's because I'm an American, but I think we started it. Why shouldn't we?
Okay. You're listening to Something's Happening on KPFK Los Angeles. We're on Monday through Thursday, midnight to 6, with Dynamite Radio for Night People. We'll be on the telephone with Bruce DePalma, inventor of the N machine, after a short break. Telephone numbers, area code 818-985-57.
The strong feeling that he really had a sensitivity for the Earth, and he wanted to do what he could do to help the planet. I have looked into his work. In front of me I have one of his papers. It's the Zerbe's Enterprises, and describes his dropping of the objects experiments. Now, I have the feeling that, although he doesn't say it specifically in this work, that he has discovered something that relates to the precession of a gyroscope, and perhaps it's the fact that it gets lighter. But the way he understands it is different than the way I would understand it. But that's not really important. What is important is that the result is achieved. He also has a picture in here of a rotating object, and he says the center is female and the outside is male, and that is an interpretation that I made a long time ago.
Right, the positive and the negative kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you set up polarities,
Mm-hmm,
and you set up a polarity in the middle of a soup of free energy, and this allows you to extract energy from that soup because you've polarized it into positive and negative. You create the polarities either through the rotation of a wheel, or you can do it chemically like they have in a battery. You can, in the kind of a battery they use in cars, a lead acid battery, you have an electrolyte, and you have two plates of lead. One has been treated electrically, that is, you charge the battery and one plate turns into lead oxide and the other turns into spongy lead, and they can be said to be polarized, male and female, in that way. Then, when dipped into the electrolyte, that is the mixture of sulfuric acid and water, electricity is produced, and when you withdraw the electricity from the battery, of course, we know it becomes discharged, but another word for discharge is depolarized. So when the polarization is lost, it has to be renewed by charging. Now, in a rotating N machine, the polarization is maintained through the rotation, and it's a mechanical way of maintaining polarization as opposed to an electrical one. So I'm just saying that these ways of understanding things are very, very advanced.
That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Do you believe that he's on the right track? Because I felt in my heart, I don't know that much about science. I'm just a regular person, But I listened to it, and I found that it really made a lot of sense.
Well,
what he was saying made a lot of sense.
You see, of course. And what I wanted to point out at this point, some thought flitted through my mind a while back, is that when we're on the edge of things, that is the edge of known knowledge, there are many interpretations which are brought forward in many experiments. And of course, you have to listen to 99% of all of this stuff and weed out the 1% which is meaningful. So, yes, he's trying to work with gravity. Yes, he thinks he has some new ideas. Yes, he's got to come up with a few different ways of understanding them. Now, whether or not this will result in a spaceship or something like that has yet to be shown. You see, it's a lot of hints are made in his work about what he would do with his gravity generator, but never is it described. So until I would see a description of some sort, I couldn't tell,
Have you ever talked to him?
I have talked to him, and I have talked to him, and I said, my feeling, when people talk to me about free energy and things like that, I said, look, everything you say to me is going to be public knowledge. If you're going to keep secrets, don't talk to me. And that's my attitude from the very beginning. I have told everyone about everything I've done. Now, I spoke to Lloyd Zerbies about this, and I said, look, Lloyd, if you want to have support to build your gravity generator, write a report, circulate it.
Yeah.
Let people know what you have. Then somebody will come up and try to help you. If it really works, the first guy that gets one is going to steal it and copy it, so there's no possibility of keeping it a secret or anything. So why don't you just give in to that right away?
Yeah, maybe Roy can play that tape again for somebody. I just want to ask one basic question. Basically,
Sure.
his approach to physics is totally different. I mean, it's like.
He's an experimental scientist.
But you get the feeling that maybe he is touching upon something that is going to. I mean, he doesn't have all the answer. He may be 75% wrong, but the way he was talking about physics is totally different than the known physics and taught physics now.
Well, that's true, but yes, but he's let go of certain of the limitations that hold people back, and so consequently he can talk about these things. He's been released.
Is he looked upon like a nut? I mean, to most scientists.
The only way that you avoid being looked at as a nut, so to speak, is if you make everything you know available, and so people can look over your experiments. They never care too much about your theories, and if you listen to this little part of a lecture I gave in there, I wasn't trying to tell them any special theories about anything. I said, well, I have an idea about this, or this is a way you can look at it. But this is the level of physics I'm coming from, so I'm not I may not be as far out as Lloyd in some ways, or maybe more far out than others. I do think he has discovered some interesting effects in gravitation which have to be looked into. And whether or not they will lead to the anti-gravity principle that he says he has, I don't know, because he won't tell me. And after I spoke to him on the phone, I said, make it public, I'll help you make it public and everything. He said he would think about it, and then he wrote me back and said that he didn't know whether he wanted to release it because it might be misinterpreted or something like that.
Why are they taught so different in Europe than they are here in the United States? I mean, you have a tremendous reception there, and Roy's risked his whole life to put you on the air here. It's really strange. I don't understand, why are they so advanced there?
They are advanced because they're not being sucked dry by the military-industrial complex.
Oh.
They're not loaded up with a lot of secrecies. Some very academic things can still happen there. Coming back from Germany, which was a humming country, back to California here, it was like coming back to the vast wasteland where everything had died.
I heard they were doing some incredible stuff over there.
They are doing incredible stuff over there, and they're very open to the perfection of industrial techniques and saving money by introducing certain new processes. It was an openness that I hadn't experienced in this country in 25 years. I used to be in this R&D business when it was really going crazy back in the late 50s and 60s.
Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate your
All right.
What you're doing and all that stuff, and I think this is about the only thing that's going to save what's left of what we have to save here.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Somebody called off the air and wanted to know how to get in contact with you.
People can reach me by writing me in Santa Barbara. I'm at, just write DePalma Energy, DePalma Energy, D-E, capital P-A-L-M-A, Energy, at 1060 Channel Drive, Santa Barbara, California 93108. If you want to know technical things and stuff, write me a letter. You can look me up in the phone book and call me, but us thinkers, we just have to have a little time to think about things. So letters are better than phone calls, but I deal with both of them.
Hello?
Hi. First thing I wanted to say is I think Bruce's ideas are exciting, and really any time that truth with a capital T in science is challenged, things get exciting. And what I was hoping Bruce could comment on are the challenges to modern physics right now. It seems like a lot of anomalies are piling up in the field, And how is physics dealing with this? Is it repressing the creativity, or is there kind of an excited attitude toward looking at these anomalies? I know about, what he said about his own personal experience, but in general, is the field in turmoil right now?
I don't think it's as much in turmoil in America as it is in Europe. I think that what's happened in America is that the military utility of every scientific advance is examined and immediately applied. This is a very strong thing that I felt, the strong military influence. Of course, we know in Southern California, I think it's 2 out of every 3 people work for this military industrial complex. It's the idea that every idea is examined immediately for its utility in a quick-to-realize 1-year or 2-year type R&D operation. Nobody ever looks very far ahead.
Yeah, I think the question is, can I use this invention to raise the amount of money I get from the government next year? Can it demonstrate something important by next year when I ask for more money from my department?
Well, right. It's a very short-sighted approach, but I'm really trying to put this in the right kind of approach. There's a certain mentality to the military, and since the military is the primary source of funding, and this is primarily going along the lines of requirements and needs which are fulfilled by proposals which are submitted by various contractors. So it's not, in the days when I started in the R&D business, we would go to the Navy or the Army or the Air Force or somewhere, and we would present, we have an idea for doing this, or we've invented this so-and-so, and we think we can do thus and such with it. And a lot of times you could have sold innovative new ideas to the agencies, and that's the way it used to work. Now, nobody sells anything new to these people. They already formulate their requirements. They send out a request for a proposal, and the people fill them. It's like Reagan says, we want Star Wars, okay? And then everybody submits proposals on how to achieve the aims of the original directive. Now, there's another facet to this, too. The other facet is I've been trying to, since I went away and I went to a foreign country, I could see America from a distance. And I tried to say to myself, what is really wrong with our country? Why isn't it responding in some way? And why are industrially we turning into a pile of rusty old machines? And one of the conclusions that I came to was that the people who are in the military have constantly on their mind World War III. And everything that's done is done in the context of a war. Now, if you have a whole mighty echelon always thinking in terms of requirements of a war, then no new research is done, no pollution is ever cleaned up, no activity is pursued, like conserving the forests, for instance. Remember, we heard Watt 3 or 4 years ago say, well, why should we conserve wood? Because the war's coming and it's all going to be destroyed anyway. Now, that is what I consider the military mentality. Now, in that context, an idea like free energy, for instance, which suddenly changes the rules a little bit and puts different kinds of priorities on things, this is not what the planners want. The planners want to execute the plan. And so that's what's so frightening about this, because I now see that the reason that I've been getting such a snubbing in this country is not because the things I've been saying are wrong. It's because they disrupt the plan, you see. But the thing is, when you go abroad and see other countries, then you see that our plan is not their plan, or their plan is not our plan. And the thing is, then that gives us hope, you see, that there may be some possibility that we can break out of this.
Would it be possible to kind of sneak your concepts in the back door by introducing the notions into the areas of
imaginary? There is no explanation for why the voltage appears in the wire. None whatsoever.
That's correct.
And the thing is, I'm saying there's no explanation for that, nor is there any explanation for why the voltage appears in the rotating magnet.
There's also no explanation as to
why there's a torque applied to the wire, which is cutting the magnetic lens of force, that refers to Lenz's law. In fact, I've asked guys that I know that work for Hughes, that are PhDs in different types of physics, and their explanation basically is the same one that comes out of the book. Nobody knows why, or even how, the electrons rotate around the wire that passes through the field. What exactly happens? No one can explain it. Although there is an interesting parallel to this. When they discovered superconductivity, which, by the way, wasn't done in the 70s, it was done quite a while ago. If you have no thermal activity, you have a complete interaction between magnetic fields, and something will levitate there, which in effect is a mild form of a generator. Because it's moving, and there is no stress upon the moving object due to the Lenz's law or the eddy currents.
Well, that's true.
But they don't say that. That was my point. They don't indicate to you that there is a free motion there, which is unobstructed, in the sense that there is a form of energy being displaced, but it's not being utilized.
It's an interesting thought.
Did you fully comprehend that? When they came up with superconductivity, they failed to mention the fact that there is, in fact, a free form of energy. However, since it's not plugged into a TV or whatever, they don't elaborate anymore. To me, as an amateur scientist, what it means to me is if you can duplicate the work through the lines out of there into something without creating any heat, then essentially what you're going to have is a generator that just spins all day long and runs whatever.
Well, people have been saying that the magnetic field is the source of energy, and this is, sure, Joe Newman says the same thing, but how to get it out. And you might have some idea. You have to try it.
Yeah, I wanted to pass one thing on to you. As I say, I'm an amateur scientist, and I found that I've been able to come up with a lot more information than most of these guys that are being churned out of school. As a matter of fact, I mean, some of my friends are engineers, and they can't even do their damn tax return. They ask me because I'm an accountant by trade. So that ought to give you an idea of how well they read. I mean, a simple 1040 easy form. But anyway...
Stumps me.
Yeah. One of the things that I have discovered in my research is regarding superconductivity is this. The materials that they're using, there is a compression factor that relates to the molecular structure. Now, if you build a model of the materials that they're using that produces superconductivity at certain temperatures, you'll find, and they don't mention anything about this, but there is a compression factor. In other words, the molecules take a shape which allows the electrons to flow through the material without creating heat.
Well, that's what happens.
Okay, well, let me finish.
All right.
Now, the big drive now is to have a material that has a superconductive quality at room temperature. And all they have to do, and I know this sounds overly simple, but it would take mounds of computer analysis to compute the thermal expansions of metals at room temperature in order to duplicate the exact lattice structure in the materials when it is cooled down to 277 degrees Kelvin. That's all they basically have to do, and superconductivity will be available in a material which can operate up to maybe 150 degrees Fahrenheit.
Well, I think that's great. If I were you, I'd get right on it and see if I could whip some of that up in my garage, and you might win a Nobel Prize. I'm maybe a little facetious, but this is a very important problem right now, and if you have some idea of how to approach it, you ought to go after it.
Put it on a motorcycle. Honda will pay plenty. Thank you.
All right.
Hello?
Well, I would like to ask if there would be cassette tapes available of tonight's program.
Yes, write me at DePalma Energy, at 1060 Channel Drive.
Okay.
1060 Channel Drive, Santa Barbara, California, 93108, and ask me for them.
Very nice. And
There's probably a library. We have a lot. I have boxes of our radio.
Yes, we have quite a few.
Also, I wanted to ask about some papers or books or journals on the experiments that were described in the initial part of the program.
Yes, I'm going to, of course, that's what they wanted to do. They want me to write a article about the lecture that I gave for Raum und Zeit in Germany, which is going to be now distributed in English in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And when I prepare this, I'm going to put it in general circulation. So just write, when you write me, tell me that's what you want, and I'll send you one of those when we get it put together. But that's on the agenda.
That's very nice, very interesting.
All right, I'm glad. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Hello.
Oh, wow, it's great to get on the air and talk to you. I was skeptical for a long time, but listening to you tonight, Bruce, I think you've given me enough facts where I can kind of believe what you're talking about.
Well, that's wonderful.
I enjoyed your work with the Firesign Theater for many years. No, just kidding.
Well, yeah. Yeah, go on.
I wonder if there isn't a time component. Terence McKenna talks a lot about how time is neglected in physics, and we really only have duration. I think Roy was saying the other night when we talk about time. Maybe when you spin something, you're doing something to the time, the local duration wave, and you're trespassing into a hyperdimension, and you're drawing energy out of a hyperdimension.
Perfectly possible. And there was a Russian physicist called Kozyrev who had actually done experiments with gyroscopes in the vicinity of processes, chemical processes and living processes, and he did discover that this field around the gyroscope did affect the time rate at which way things are happening. And
if this is true, it would affect Terence's novelty wave, and you might experience greater ingression of novelty around localized rotational fields.
That's exactly right. You see, it's very, very interesting that I have a thought about logic that is interesting. That rotation is something which cannot be described. Most of the words in our dictionary are defined in terms of words which do not contain that which is being defined. I mean, that's really how dictionaries work. There's a few words, a few things which I call intrinsically self-describing realities, which cannot be described in that manner. They can only be described in terms of themselves. Like God, for instance, is a good example of that kind of a concept. But rotation is a thing which is so singular that it cannot be described in terms of anything but itself. Now, what that means, in my mind, is that logic itself does not include rotation. And that means that if you think logically for a long enough period of time, you will return to your original thought. It's what's called circular reasoning. And the reason that your logic will go in a circle is because logic does not contain intrinsic. Logic is linear. It doesn't contain rotation. It's an expression of, like you might say, a bunch of linear vectors which add up. And the fact that it doesn't contain rotation means that logic always returns to itself. There's an implicit circularity in logic because of the fact that rotation is not contained in any of the concepts of logic. It's intrinsically self-defining. I don't know whether this is too complex to understand, but it's a way of understanding something like karma or even the rotation of the planets.
Yeah, this ties in beautifully with. I was just the Grateful Dead concert at Irvine Meadows, and I was dancing on the lawn, and this woman was dancing nearby, and she was going circles, circles, and like the Sufis have danced in circles, and this circle is a powerful metaphor, throughout a lot of philosophies. And this might be philosophy and coming together with physics. So it might be an indication of that happening.
Well, it is. See, philosophy is a collection of linear moves. You said it. A collection of linear moves, if if it's in a logical pattern, and that in itself is something we could talk about, what is logic, but a collection of linear moves in logic always results in a circle. And it's something that I've thought about for years, but you might chew on it for a while, maybe it'll...
Another little anecdote, my older brother is 4 years older, and we always used to grow up together talking about weird science questions, and on long trips, I remember I got this thing, we had a couple of flashlight batteries, and I said, hey Paul, look, if I spin these flashlight batteries fast enough around each other, something's going to happen, it's going to go invisible or something, it's going to warp out, It was, just as a 7-year-old kid or whatever, I had that insight,
Well, you suggested something to me right now which I wanted to bring up, and if this is a slight digression, but it's on the same track of what you're talking about. I said earlier that the things that we discover in science are mainly the things which are obscured by the blinders of our interpretations, and that all the things of nature are happening around us all the time, but we choose not to see certain things. Now consider this. There's a paradigm called relativity, and it says that the only thing that's important is the relative motion of two objects. Whether A moves past B or whether B moves past A is not important. It's only the relative positions of each of these which is important. Now, consider this following physical experiment. You take two conventional electrical generators. One, you put the magnets in the side walls of the generator and make the rotor with the wires on it go round. In the second machine, you put the magnets in the rotor and make the magnets go round and keep the wires in the stator and keep them fixed. Now, according to the principle of relativity, both generators should produce a maximum of 100% output, which is what you get for that kind of machine. Now, if we reject the idea of relativity and say that there's a difference between whether we move the magnets or keep them or rotate them, really, then we might build these two machines and then test and see to find out whether or not it makes a difference whether the magnets sit still or the magnets go around on the rotor. So that's what suggested itself from your idea of rotating those batteries. But you see, I was speaking to a physicist the other day he said, well, why would anybody ever think that there would be a difference, you see? And that's what holds us off from doing the experiment to see whether there might be a difference, you see.
Do you have a big enough experimental crew to do all these great experiments that are going to...
Well, we've been doing them for a long time, but the basic thing that takes the time is to figure out the simple experiment and to make sure that all the factors that would gum it up are isolated. And so when you finally get around to doing it, the experiment itself might be simple, but you've had to think, well, when I talk about my tuning fork experiment where I glued my watch to the surface of an electric clock and I watched the two second hands go around, don't think that didn't drop on my head like Newton's apple. I thought about that for a long time. And sure, it only took a half hour or so, or 19 minutes to prove the principle, but it was a tremendous amount of thought.
Well, these things sound like high art. I'd like to see them in galleries on La Cienega or something, just to be able to go in there and see these experiments at work, proving these weird new concepts.
Well, they're not weird they're weird because they're outside of our present knowledge, but that's only because physics has never studied rotation. They always thought that the dynamics of rotating objects were just the same. And so we were adding a new piece of knowledge to our physics, and of course that is going to open up a tremendous new range of experiments. I couldn't even tell you what